Welcome everybody. My name is Kyla Holt and I'm Head of Volunteering and Alumni Programmes at the University of York. It's my tremendous pleasure to welcome you, our chair and our panel, to this, our latest professional network on sustainability. As you'll have noticed, this session is being recorded so that we can make it available to both you and other alumni after the event. Please do watch out for the link, which we'll send you within the next week or so. You'll be able to find this on our alumni pages, along with details of our future events, including our next next guest speaker event on slavery, and including modern slavery and Black Lives Matters, and of course our next professional network event taking place in April, which is around retail. Now, it gives me great pleasure, as I've said, to introduce our chair for today's event, Jo Hossell, who is one of my colleagues at the University of York. Jo is our Sustainability and Inclusivity Engagement Officer in the Directorate of Estates and Campus Services, and is basically all things sustainable for the University of York. So Jo, if I can hand over to you. Oh, sorry, one last thing, I do beg your pardon. Don't forget that you'll be able to ask your questions using the question and answer tab at the bottom of the Zoom. Thank you.
Thank you, Kyla. So as Kyla said, my name's Jo Hossell. I run the sustainability programs at the university, encouraging staff, students and visitors on campus to adopt more sustainable steps. The aim not being so much to make everyone perfectly sustainable, but to make as many as possible imperfectly sustainable, and to develop good habits that they will take away with them. I started my working life on research in the impacts of climate change, initially through a PhD, and then as a university researcher, and lastly as an environmental consultancy. But when I moved to York over a decade ago, I swapped my perspective from looking at the adaptation to climate change to looking at mitigating it. And at the same time, expanded my view beyond climate change to wider sustainability issues, and to developing ways to encourage individuals to collectively play a role through small changes in their own behaviours. So I'm delighted to be the chair of today's session, and I think we will have some very interesting discussions from very varied perspectives, wide range of expertise on the panel. And for you as an audience, we hope to provide you some entertainment and some engaging discussion. And as Kyla mentioned, your role in the proceedings is to ask the questions that you've been wanting to ask to satisfy your curiosity and to stimulate our discussions. Anything from the political to the practical on what sustainability means to what we can do to achieve it. And whilst hopefully people are typing questions in the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen, I will briefly introduce you to our panelists, after which I will ask them to describe for themselves how their careers have developed and what sustainability means to them, both personally and professionally. So we'll start with Cass Hebron, who is Communication Officer at Friends of the Earth Europe and is based in Brussels. Cass, in her spare time, has also launched a free email newsletter, which is very engaging, very refreshing read, and it looks at different aspects of sustainability and climate activism. She's also been volunteering for the university as a regional coordinator for Belgium, and has been providing opportunities for local alumni to meet and connect up. Our second panelist is Pete Gomori, who's creative director and founder of boutique creative agency Studio Gomori, which has clients from a range of industries, from ethical fashion to technology, culture and sport. And Pete also leads on production of a zine focused on ethical fashion. And finally, all the way from Bangalore, is Grishma Jain joins us. She is also an ex-York alumni, having studied a master's in green chemistry and sustainable industrial technology. And she now works as senior consultant at Sofies, with expertise in resource efficiency and clean production, industrial symbiosis, and waste management. So that's a very brief introduction from me, but Cass, could I ask you to explain how you got to be where you are in your sustainability career and what it means to you personally and professionally?
Sure, thanks. Okay, so hi everyone. It's really cool to see that there are so many people here interested in sustainability. And it's kind of weird because I didn't graduate that long ago. I graduated in 2019. And I already knew that I wanted to go into communications for sustainability. While I was at university, I was running a sustainability magazine called Wild, which is still running actually. And towards the last term of uni, where I was freaking out, as you do, because I was like, oh my God, I'm going to be unemployed, I'm moving back in with my parents. And I was applying for anything that I could find. And someone that I knew who I'd previously worked with sent me a link to this opportunity in Belgium to work in the Fair Trade Advocacy Office, which is a department of fair trade that promotes fairer EU laws for trade policies. And I sort of went, haha, imagine if I ended up in Belgium, imagine if I moved out of the UK. So I applied for that, sent it into the void in the night. Anyway, long story short, I'm in Belgium now. And I went and I did a 6-month traineeship at the Fair Trade Advocacy Office in Brussels. And then towards the end of that, I took on a contract as a media assistant at the Oxfam EU office. And at the end of that, I took a contract for communications at Friends of the Earth Europe, which is where I am now. And I've also been working as a freelance writer. This is something I started doing during university. I was like editing, writing social media, blogs, and I kept doing that while I was working. And then last year, as Jo mentioned, I started a newsletter, which was about how you can be sustainable without having a lot of expertise or money or time. Because I think there's a lot of like jargon floating around and people are afraid to ask. So it's about what things mean, what terms like climate justice, intersectionality mean, and how you can make an effective impact. I also saw there was a question on what the name is. It's called the Green Fix, and I'll put a link in the chat for everyone. I can't remember if there was a second question. What sustainability means to me? Yes, so this is an interesting one because when I was at university, I thought sustainability was mainly environmental, green stuff, you know, like recycling and secondhand shopping, which is one part of it, but it's a much wider topic. It's about sustainability, not just environmentally, but socially, culturally, and what is sustainable for you personally. That it's not about being a perfectly sustainable person, which isn't even possible in kind of the everyday life that we live, but doing the best we can with the resources that we have and pushing for change at a wider level. So I won't go into my climate justice speech now, but I hope that answers the question.
Thank you, Cass. If I can ask a similar question then to Pete, how did you get to do what you're doing at the moment, and what does sustainability mean to you?
Thanks. So I have had a kind of a bit of a wiggly career through marketing and creative work, which is that I started off as a marketing manager client side, sort of in-house in companies. I actually spent quite a long time in the art world. I worked for Tate Modern and the Whitechapel Gallery and the National Maritime Museum in London. And that was all my kind of grounding in marketing and that kind of brand communication. And following that, I sort of followed that passion. I then went into the agency side of work, which was, you know, coming up with ideas for clients on behalf of clients, and worked on all sorts of different things, from food and drink to sports to charities, video games, all sorts of different things. And what that journey made me realize was that the the only way to really work on things that you were passionate about and had energy for was to kind of do your own thing, really. So I decided to start my own agency after I became a creative director, which is it's a micro agency, which is a very fancy way of saying that it's just me. And then I have a little gang of freelance people who I bring into teams, and we work on client projects like that. So so my journey was really one of kind of learning my craft as a creative marketer, as a copywriter, an art director, eventually a creative director, and then kind of realizing, you know, that there is a way of focusing this energy and this these skills you have on things that you really want to be a part of. So since about 2 or 3 years now, I've been running my own thing, and what I've been able to do is find clients to work with who I share some kind of energy with. Not all of my clients are sustainable, but I would say that probably all of them are progressive, is probably the word I would use. So whether that's relating to the environment, or whether that's relating to labor practices, or whether that's related to actually just how they treat their staff. But specifically, I have had a number of clients within ethical or sustainable fashion, and they have tended to be smaller startup types of clients who are kind of emerging onto the scene and trying to get people to pay attention to what they're doing. And it's interesting that a lot of people will say that you know, sustainable fashion is really kind of cool right now, it's really kind of in, but actually it represents a very small part of the market still. So it's really a kind of a battle for these smaller brands, these more sustainable brands, to get the word out there. And a lot of what I do is help them try and compete at the same level as the bigger, far less sustainable and ethical brands by trying to learn from what they do in terms of communicating themselves through branding, through marketing, content, advertising. And not just relying on the ethical credentials that they have, which are fantastic, but you need to communicate those in a way that's compelling and exciting. So that's my journey and what it means to me professionally. Personally, I've just always been interested in sustainability, and one of the things which I have been writing about recently, blogging about and talking about a lot, is how interesting it is to go through a journey of you know, being an employee or a worker at the start of your career, to then getting to a point in your career where you're saying, actually, I have to make all the decisions here. I'm making all the decisions. I can choose all of my suppliers. I can choose the clients I work with. And although you're not, you know, a small company, I'm not Amazon or anything like that. I don't have the ability to transform everything. We all have this kind of micro power and these tiny little things that we can all do and change, which is quite exciting to you know, to run your own company and make those decisions.
Thank you. It sounds like a fascinating route into where you are at the moment. Grishma, coming to you, what has taken you on your journey and got you to where you are now?
Thanks, Jo. Sure. Thank you all for being here, and it's a great pleasure to be speaking with you today. So yeah, as Jo mentioned, I'm based in India, in Bangalore, and growing up in India, I think it's a developing country, and the environment and pollution, they're like sort of surrounded by a lot more importance being given to sort of growth than to the environment or how you prevent pollution, etc. So it was always sort of my dream to get into this field of sort of sustainability and the environment. And I was really interested in chemistry. So I was trying to find a way to put those two together, and I didn't find anything that really brought it together well within India. And while I was doing some research, I came across the green chemistry program at York, and that's what brought me to York for my master's. And yeah, I think it completely opened out a new world to me, a new field that was really interesting. And I did want to bring back the knowledge that I had from the master's back to India, because I felt it was something that's really lacking in terms of the industries, and sort of bringing the environmental aspect back to the industries, which are not really looking at that angle at all. So yeah, I think it was kind of the field that I wanted to always work in, and it's what I strive to move towards. But yeah, my career has not been exactly the way I had planned it. I worked mostly, I was also keen on not working with a large company. I wanted to work with somebody who was working on the ground and making a difference. So I first started working with an NGO in Bangalore, and we worked on mostly a lot of sort of eco-industrial sort of work, industrial ecology, but it was on a much smaller sort of project basis. And then I got contacted by a few universities in the US, and I did 4 years of air pollution and climate change sort of projects as an independent consultant. So I worked with an NGO for 3 years, and then I worked as an independent consultant for 4 years. And then I came across this company, Sofies, where I'm working now. I've been there for the last 4 years, and it's a small boutique sustainability company based in Geneva. It's just about 40 of us. And now I'm sort of very close to doing what my master's was based on and what I dreamt I would be doing with my life to some extent, where it's back to industrial ecology, back to eco-industrial parks and resource efficiency, cleaner production, sort of all of those areas. But it's a really large, the field is really large, and we work on a range of different projects. So it's been a great learning experience where I'm learning on each project, and I'm actually expanding my knowledge to much, much more varied sort of areas of sustainability. So yeah, I wouldn't say I'm working in one field now. I'm probably working in 20 different fields, and I'm learning on a daily basis, which is, for me, the most exciting thing professionally and also personally. And yeah, I think for me personally, sustainability is mostly about just re-examining everything on a daily basis and seeing, is there a low impact you can be making with what you're doing, and just re-looking at everything from the point where you can just think of what is your impact on the earth. Thank you.
Thank you. So as we discussed at the beginning, if people have questions that they want to ask, if they can put those in the Q&A box, and we will work our way through some of those. There's a few appearing already. I'm just catching up with what has been written at the moment. But I think one of the things that has been quite common to what the three of you have said is individual actions, often small companies, small steps. And the question that I'm sort of paraphrasing here is it possible for larger companies to also become sustainable? Or what are the images that they're putting out greenwash, or are there genuinely some areas where you feel that companies, big companies in particular, are definitely doing the right things in moving towards sustainability? Pete, you were mentioning a range of smaller companies. Do you also know some larger ones that are doing the right thing?
Well, yeah, I mean, there are lots of large companies who, and the folks who are, I will actually defer entirely to this, to the other folks on the panel for having a deeper understanding of sustainability in itself. There are big companies, for example, in fashion, Patagonia, who are doing good things. I think one of the challenges is always with a bigger company is that each individual person just has less ability to, actually flick a switch and make a big difference. And there's more hierarchy, there's more levels of complexity to get things kind of signed off and changed. And also, I think probably for less ethical companies, there is more incentive to do the minimum possible and communicate it the best possible to make it seem like they're doing things really well. So personally, having worked in some big companies and some small companies, I've very much seen that. You've seen places where we'll stick some recycling bins around the place and there you go, job done. But what I find so exciting about the kind of the ecosystem and the network and the growing buzz of small companies is that you can set up your company now thinking about all of the sustainable aspects of what you're doing, and at each decision point make a positive decision. And I think that's really the way that a lot of things will change in the future, is when you try and turn a big moving ship. Obviously that's very difficult, but if you are individually interested, if it's part of your passion, you're just naturally going to start making these decisions as you go.
You're on mute, Joe.
Sorry, I am. I've just turned myself onto mute rather than off mute. Yeah, Cass, have you got a perspective on this from the campaigning side? Obviously, Greenpeace has a view on a lot of the large companies and what they're doing. Again, is these examples of greenwash, or are there real examples of things making a difference?
I think this is something that is debated a lot in international NGOs, because some NGOs take different approaches. Certain NGOs like WWF will work in partnership with businesses and with the private sector, whereas others will refuse to work with existing corporations under the belief that there is no way that businesses and big corporations especially can switch from being unsustainable to sustainable. And this is because their entire business model is profit driven. It doesn't bring them any benefit, in particular to switch to a more green way of working. It's not profitable for them, and for that reason it's very unlikely that they would choose to reinvent their business model for that purpose. It's just not how the current economic model is set up, either for individual corporations or as a whole in the economic system. So I'd be very skeptical when a large corporation says that they're now sustainable, because, as Pete was saying, it's incredibly complicated as well. They tend to be meshed in a really complicated structure of who makes the decisions for what. And it's also very intangible. It's very hard to measure when they say they're going to do something green and they make commitments for something 20 years in the future. I mean, companies do it a lot because they know that there's like consumer demand for it. They know that people want it to be green, but you can make yourself look green without doing very much. I mean, saying that something is green or organic or natural, there is no legally binding definition of those things to let you put them on your labels. And the same with your business practices. You can say we're trying really hard to reduce our waste, but in doing so, they can try and shift actually the attention from what they are doing to like the one token behavior that they have changed. I think there's this really great example of Starbucks that made a huge deal about trying to be more green by reducing the amount of plastic in their coffee cup lids, I think it was, and acting as if that was a huge difference, ignoring the fact that coffee cup lids on their own are not sustainable. They're plastic, they're going to end up in landfill. And actually, I think the production process for the new lids was more energy intensive than the previous one. But people will believe it. So I'd be very skeptical if a large corporation says they're going to change. They need to be really detailed and really transparent about what that change actually looks like.
And Grishma, from the companies that you're advising, small companies, do you think there is a potential to make sustainable growth within the current setup? As Cass was saying, the economy that we're currently working with isn't necessarily compatible with sustainability going forward. But is there such a thing as growth in a sustainable way?
Yeah, I think I would slightly disagree with Cass on this. I agree. I mean, it is a business model. You know, everybody's trying to be profitable, and I mean, the larger the profits, that's better. So yes, that's the model will always be based on business. But I do see there are companies that we interact with who are trying, I think, at quite a basic level to actually improve their sustainability and move towards being a lot more sustainable. I'm not saying they can be completely sustainable, but there is definitely that trend, and some are giving a great deal of importance to trying to become more sustainable in a lot of their practices, in a lot of their production lines. There's definitely the trend towards moving towards that. I wouldn't say they're going to be sustainable at the end of it, but the trend is to be more sustainable. And it is, yes, large part of it is about how it looks, the branding, etc. But it's also profitable to be sustainable in a lot of situations. So it's also coming from a profit sort of driven reasoning. So yeah, I'd say it's a mix, but you do see some brands who seem to be a lot more willing to weigh the profits with the sustainability and weigh it in a slightly different manner than they have traditionally done so.
And how then do you think we can, and the consumer and the individual can balance this green versus green statements? So often we've got groups who are sort of pitting to be the greenest. How do we get to judge, and how do we know what is right and wrong as an individual on these aspects? Where are we best to learn our information from, do you think? Cass, could I ask you, because you have a newsletter which, as you said, it helps to inform people about these sorts of things.
Sure. So when it comes to identifying whether something is greenwashing or the real deal, I mean, I actually agree with what Grishma said, that it is a mixed bag. I mean, I'm not saying that no corporation can ever be sustainable, but rather that there is a massive lack of transparency, which allows a lot of corporations to continue without making real effective changes. And that same lack of transparency makes it really difficult for an ordinary person standing in the supermarket or something to judge which product is the most ethical and sustainable. And I think that sometimes too much burden is placed on us as people that don't have all the knowledge about what's happening behind the scenes before a product arrives on the shelves to judge whether it's green or not. But there are certain things you can do. Firstly, is to educate yourself. So if you're weighing up whether a particular company is sustainable, actually go on their website and look for their explanations of their business practices, how they offset any environmental impact, how they monitor their supply chains, because it's not just about the environment, but it's also about human rights. And if they're outsourcing production, like in fashion companies, to other countries, it's good to make sure that they actually know what's happening in their factories and in the whole distribution process. If they don't have that information on their website, ask. You don't have to be an expert on what like keywords to look for, but it tells you a lot how much information they will offer, because usually a company, or in my experience, a company that is making an effort to be green will happily share with you as much information as possible about how they're being green to try and convince you, whereas a company that is not really going the full way will be a little bit more evasive. If you think that they're not being very sustainable, you can also ask them on social media, because it adds a little bit of spotlight for them to respond, because you know, everyone can see that you've asked them. I'd also look for particular certification. So one sign of greenwashing is when products have certification that is invented by the company itself. You know, it's very easy for companies to say, oh, we are 300% greener than we were last year, according to us, according to some complicated metric that you don't get to know about. Whereas there's external certification that is a much stronger guarantee, because you know exactly what they're measuring it against. So this is things like the Fair Trade certification, Rainforest Alliance for environmental things. There's also online websites that are measuring companies, like for fashion, there's a really good website called Good On You, which basically does all the analysis for you on whether it's ethical or not. And there's also online websites for a whole range of products, because I'm sort of jumping from fashion to food to everything. But there's a website called Ethical Consumer, and there's a website called The Good Shopping Guide, which tries to rank brands according to a selected list of criteria to see how ethical or unethical they are. So look for other people's evaluation of them as well, and ask questions.
Thank you. And Pete, I saw you nodding in terms of the ethical fashion side of things. What do you advocate for your clients in the way that they market their goods to say about their sustainability?
Yeah, so one thing I was just nodding out was Good on You, which I think is great. I happen to have written a few articles for it, but that's, yeah, I also think it's great for other reasons too. I think the really interesting thing here is the challenge of cutting through and explaining that you actually are ethical and sustainable when everyone's saying that they are. And when there is just, we're in a situation now where there's so much information everywhere, it's just impossible for your ordinary person to process it all. When I work with my clients, actually often what I'm saying to them is, and this will sound a bit weird, but I actually end up saying what you need to do is actually not just lean on those ethical credentials and not just whack them at the top of your homepage on your website or in your advert or whatever it is, because although those are really important to get across, and there are lots of ways you will do that, if you don't do the other bit that all these non-ethical companies are doing, which is create a compelling brand, demonstrate a lifestyle that people want to access, be cool, all of these things. If you don't do those things, then you're going to miss out on a huge potential market, because there are people like me who will get really stuck into all of the detail and try and figure out, how organic is this cotton and that kind of thing. But there are a lot of people who just won't, but they still have an inclination to be sustainable. So so a lot of what I do with my clients is helping them to represent the attitude they're trying to express, represent the vibe and the lifestyle, which these big companies do. They do that really, really well. And so what the smaller companies need to do is figure out how to use those same tools to communicate something which is actually, legitimate and genuine and really important, and apply that to what they're doing. And I think that the green versus green thing is really interesting too, which is that it's again, going back to how much information there is and how much stuff there is on Twitter and Instagram or wherever you want to go, it surely is impossible to be right or perfect about anything. And so all we can do is try our absolute best, as Cass was saying, do as much research as your brain energy allows, and try and support people who, when you see other people who you trust and who are genuine when they're promoting these things, try and support those guys. And I think the more that we share recommendations, we all talk to each other and say, hey, here's something cool. This is something which is kind of getting lost a little bit in the digital age. It's so easy just to Google, organic t-shirt. You'll get so many answers coming up. Actually, I do think personal recommendation increasingly will sort of come back into the way that we live our lives like that.
Thank you. And Grishma, from your perspective in the industrial side, do we need more standards on this to help guide people through these decision processes? There are lots of places that we've said where people can educate themselves about it, but do we actually need some legislation and some standardization on terms, do you think?
Absolutely. I agree with what Cass was saying, where, standardization is really important to have the right standards, and exactly how those standards are created, what they're based on, what are the measurements that are involved. So that's the only way where you can sort of trust that the standard means something. So absolutely, I think there are quite a few existing standards out there that that are really good and that are already and especially I think Europe is working a lot on building different standards for a lot of the different areas of sustainability, when it comes to waste, when it comes to different recycling of materials, etc. So they exist and they need to be improved, but it's primarily about sort of identifying the right ones and looking for those in the products that you buy or in companies that are functioning, just to see which ones are actually legitimate and which aren't.
There's an interesting question here related to that, but looking more at protecting rather than highlighting standards. Its question says that our world lacks the institutional arrangements needed to protect global public goods such as the ocean and the world's rainforests. Do you think that's right? And how do we take steps to address that sort of issue? Sorry, Cass, can I go back to you on that?
Sorry, could you repeat the question, please?
So the world lacks the institutional arrangements to protect global public goods, such as rainforests and the oceans. Do you think that is a correct statement? It's one that's been made by the Dash-Gupta review. Is that something we can do at a global level? Or is it something that we are still having to, that we will still be striving to do into the future?
I think that's an interesting question, because this is also a question about how effective it is to try and impose kind of institutional agreements, commitments, legislation to protect the earth, basically, because there are plenty of attempts to do so. There's plenty of very wide-ranging commitments, most notably the Paris Climate Agreement, but also on regional levels. I mean, you have the EU strategy for 2030, the EU Green Deal, which encompasses a whole range of ways to protect the land and the oceans and the planet with a set of measurable targets. But just having a law or a commitment to say we will do this, we will reduce emissions by this much by this date, isn't the same as it actually happening, and it's not the same as it actually working. It's a necessary step. You need to have those, you know, binding agreements in place, but we know from experience that that doesn't always lead to follow through. In fact, the last biodiversity targets for 2020, all of them were missed. So there's a long way to go between commitment and actual action. But the question is, if that doesn't work, if binding legislation doesn't work, then what does? Because in my work in kind of EU advocacy, obviously we push for laws and binding targets and measurable targets, because that is the existing system that's in place, and it's about trying to push through the right changes in that system. But you can also argue that the current political system isn't set up for the amount of changes that are needed, that the current process for coming up with laws like this is too slow, that it's too technical, that it's too bogged down with competing interests from industry lobbying, from political interests, and that it will never deliver what is needed. I'm not here to kind of announce what is the answer to protecting the earth, because we know scientifically what we need to do. We know how to reverse biodiversity loss and restore nature. We know we have those tools available to us, but we are lacking a way to make sure that they are at the top of the list of political priorities and institutional priorities, corporate priorities as well, to make sure that that's at the heart of all their decisions, which at the moment it's not. It's one of a few competing interests. I don't know if that answers the question, but that's, and I wish there was a clear answer.
Pete, did you want to come in there?
Well, yeah, I mean, listen, this is not my, I'm in no way an expert on this, but I you know, maybe sort of dig back to my politics degree many years ago to think about this. I mean, it seems to me, I mean, I totally agree. I mean, it seems to me that there's just, it's very difficult to rely on anything which is kind of intangible and is not a kind of a direct action to actually expect any change. I was reading interviews with Bill Gates about his book and talking about the investment you need to put into actually people coming up with actual, you know, answers and things that can be done, and not just let's talk about this, let's say that this is possible. But that's why I talk a lot about this micro power idea and just all these little things that we can do. What are the things that we can change? You know, in a way, I think that some of the things that might change might be more local in lots of different senses. So, for example, will the UK over the next 10 years start to say things like, look, we need to attract more tourists again, post-COVID, post-Brexit, all that kind of thing? And what if we committed to trying to say we are going to have the greenest beaches? We're going to turn this into we're going to not just set regulations, but we're going to have ambitions to create spaces that people want to come to, and that naturally has to be environmentally friendly and sustainable and beautiful and organic and biodiverse and all that kind of thing. So in other words, projects that you can invest in that will have an impact. Those kinds of things to me seem to be more immediate to sort of attract people to come and actually say, yes, let's put money into this, let's do this, let's create a company that's going to service this, all those kinds of things. I don't know if that makes sense.
And Grishma, just to extend on that, do you think that the biggest changes that we can make are ones that individuals will make, ones that businesses will make through adopting green practices, or is it ones that government legislation or global agreements could make?
Yeah, I mean, I think it has to be a combination, and there's probably not one that falls above the other. But I also see a question over there, which is about what I think the sustainability priorities for countries like India and Africa, and I think it ties in where I feel like the legislation is really, really important, because if the government's not giving it importance, then it's not on the priority. But we do have pretty good legislation in India, I would say, for the environment, for waste management, etc. The legislation is in place, but the implementation is really, really limited or lacking. And so just having the legislation is definitely not enough. And I see the gap where bringing in the government, bringing in the implementation, and getting companies to be, to completely sort of be in line and follow the legislation. So we do see it where there's there's companies that are going and sort of looking for the legislation, upcoming legislation, and already trying to sort of meet those or go beyond the requirement of legislation, but it's a very small percentage. So I think, especially for developing countries, the government has to play a much larger role in pushing awareness, pushing the legislation, pushing implementation to bring in some of the sustainability practices which are not the priority for a common person.
And do you think that the current COVID pandemic will actually force any changes to the way that things have been working, either for governments or corporations, to reevaluate our relationship with nature, or to allow more significant steps towards sustainability as we come out from the pandemic? Do you think this is a turning point for us to allow greater sustainability going forward? Pete?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think, again, thinking from the kind of the story that everyone wants to generate post-COVID, people talk about the recovery, people talk about a green recovery, but I just think that coming out of all of this, so many people have just had a moment just to sit and think about their lives and the universe and everything, and just think, what am I doing? Like, what am I doing here? What's going on here? And I think a lot of people will come out with a renewed energy to say, let's not hang about with shaping the world the way that we want to shape it. And I think that if you look at the way that we're all going to emerge back out into our cities, that we're all going to try and ramp up our businesses, that we're going to be able to do volunteering projects a lot more again, all of those kinds of things, I think that it will just be a no-brainer for a lot of people to say, yes, let's do this in a way that makes us feel not that we're going back to what it was before, but that we are going into the world we want to go into. We want to go into now. Certainly, this is a bit of a side note, but for somebody who's got to you know, my age, you suddenly realize, I'm 38, you suddenly realize, hang on a sec, I can't blame the grown-ups anymore. This is the world that I'm creating right now for my kids, and what are they going to say to me, and that kind of thing. And it just seems to be, you know, if you think about everybody who's in charge of something now, that's what I'm sort of getting riled up about now. People who are in charge of things, you've got this moment now where you can say, let's have a vision, let's put it into practice, let's encourage this world we want to be, not just let's ride along on, well, it has to be like this. But like I was saying before, I mean, that's a random thing I said before about the English coastline, but what if you know, let's pick a city and have 3 new eco hotels that we designate, instead of letting them all just kind of like, you know, roll along like they were before and hope, fingers crossed, everything gets back to normal. Let's be creative with the way that we do business and government and politics and everything.
And so what personal steps have you learnt from the last year that you'd take forward then, Pete?
Well, like I was saying, I think for me, it's about realizing all of the little places where you do have power, and saying, you know, every time you sit down to your laptop, every time you start a new month and you're making plans, every time you're planning for quarter, there are these decisions. Everybody has these little decisions that you can make. You know, I might be doing a photo shoot, I might be doing a video shoot, I might be commissioning an animation. I might be having a new client meeting with somebody to talk about an advert they want to do. And previously, you know, I mean, again, even 5 years ago, you would have just said, right, well, off we go, get on the train, go up to the city where they are. And now you'll start thinking, well, hang on, actually, for so many reasons, do we need to do that? Like, is there, you know, environmentally, sustainably, ethically, all these different things? Why do we need to do any of these things we did before? We proved that we can do everything so differently now. There's absolutely no need for me to get on a train and go up to Edinburgh for a first business meeting when we can do it like this, and it works perfectly well. All of these decisions that we have personally will make a difference, and if we can encourage everybody to do those, then people with varying levels of power and control over lots of different things will hopefully make, you know, the decisions that make the differences in their positions too.
And Cass, what steps would you take forward from this last year? What have you learnt as a result of doing things, having to do things differently?
I've kind of been learning to be more balanced in what a sustainable life looks for me personally. I used to think that it was about going to extreme lengths to try and reduce my individual waste and to be perfect, right? But actually, I think there's a lot to be said for sustainability that also makes you happy, that you can sustain. I mean, that sounds obvious when you say it, but you cannot sustain having to go across the city to the only zero waste shop in town, you know, that costs 3 times as much as the local supermarket. You have to find the changes that you can make. But I am also, at the same time, less willing to back down from changes that I can make, but that I just didn't want to make because they were a little bit inconvenient before. It's one thing to not be able to afford to do something, or for that to not to be open to you, not to have access to a certain way of living, but I can afford not to take flights. So I'm not going to take flights, and I'm not going to say, oh, okay, I wouldn't normally, but this is a lot easier, this is a lot cheaper, it goes closer to the town that I need to be in. I know that I have the capacity to find a better way to do it. So I'm going to take that. I'm also really conscious of this phenomenon that I find really interesting, and it's called moral licensing, which is when you take part in an ethical behavior, like signing a petition or donating to charity, you're more likely later to actually do the less sustainable thing later in the day or whenever it is, because your brain thinks that you've kind of compensated for that you've already done your bit. And so actually it's not that bad if you let yourself off the hook. And I'm trying to be really conscious of that and saying it's not enough to say, oh, I do this, so I don't need to worry about that. I need to be proactive in my life to look for changes that I can make. Yeah.
And Grishma, what advice have you got for practical changes you want to take forward?
Yeah, I think in terms of professionally, I primarily work from home. That's been my structure even before COVID. So it didn't make a large difference to me in terms of professional work, but except for I would do a lot of travel for onto the field when I had to do like a project, an assessment or something on site, which has been reduced. And a learning has been that a lot of this can be done with interesting tools. You can do a lot of this offline, online, completely removed from that location. It does come with some negatives, but the positives, I think, far outweigh that travel. And so, yeah, the learning's been that there are so many different ways of getting the same outcome. And I agree. I would always prefer not to fly, but my job makes me fly. And that's one part of my job that I really dislike. So this COVID year has been great to find ways of, saying, okay, I cannot fly. It's not been an option. So what are different ways of getting the same work done? And there've been really interesting solutions that have come out of it. On a personal level, I think it's sort of how I've always looked at it, where, yeah, you have to just keep re-looking at ways to change something in your life where you feel like there can be a slightly lower impact on what you do. But I agree, you can't be policing every single thing. So you have to find a balance that works, but always while you're challenging it at the same time.
We've had a few questions which are sort of slightly broadening out the discussion, but looking at energy and the role of renewable energy going forward. Do the panelists see that the role of renewable energy, and this is particularly examples in the UK of solar and onshore and offshore wind, are they, what do you see their role in for mitigating climate change in the future? And Grishma, if you've got examples from India of the types of renewable energy which are prevalent there, that would be really useful to bring in as well.
Yeah, I mean, I have very many examples from India. We have like solar, especially solar technology, really the government's sort of taken it on, and there's like really large solar farms as well as wind farms. But I think I have not yet, with all the research that I've managed to do individually and through projects that I've run, unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to give you an answer because I'm still struggling to figure it out, whether it does work and whether the offset can happen with it or how sustainable it is still a question for me. So I'm sorry, but I don't have an answer for that. It's still a question for me to figure it out.
And Pete, what about you? Do you have a handle on the value of renewable technologies going forward? Well, for your industries?
Yeah, I mean, from my point of view, basically, I mentioned this idea of being creative before. I think that my take on that in general is that the more when you try and stop people from doing things, I find just in terms of behavioral communication and behavioral campaigns I worked on, it seems quite hard to get people to stop doing things or change what they're doing. And what you're doing is wrong, so do this instead. And I, just from a communication point of view, like anything which says, look, here's the bright future. Here's the amazing, wonderful, brilliant thing that we can all have if we just commit to it. And so, renewable energy, helping people see how, it's something you want to be a part of, electric cars, all these kinds of things. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'll again defer to other people in terms of what is the thing that will make the biggest difference to the amount of carbon in the atmosphere. But in terms of how we get humans to change their decisions, yes, I think all of those things are easy to understand and tangible things that look like what the future is supposed to look like, and therefore, yeah, let's go towards that.
And Cass, what about you? What do you think these technologies offer for tackling climate change, or are there better solutions that we need to take?
like the other panelists, I'm not an expert, I'm not a renewable energy expert. I would say that it has to go hand in hand with other changes, that of course we want more renewable energy and less fossil fuels, and that is a crucial part of a green energy transition. But it's not just about finding other ways to sort of fund our current lifestyle, but also about changing our lifestyle so we don't have such a high demand for energy, so we are not requiring so many natural resources to sustain our current way of living. So it has to go alongside energy efficiency, energy reduction, and I don't know where I'm going with the sentence. And there's other things that you can do from an individual level, because I can't speak very much about how renewable energy compares to other actions you can take. But if you want to maximize your impact as an individual, you can use a renewable energy provider, but you can also look into community-owned energy investment. And that way you're also bringing a benefit to your local community and having a more democratic way of managing your energy. So that's not really an answer to your question, but I thought I'd throw it in there.
No, I think it's interesting that it highlights that there's no one single solution. You're right. I think there's a range of things we all need to be looking at, and it's not just a global solution that's needed, but individual action and business level action as well to do that. So thank you everyone for a very interesting and wide-ranging discussion. I will hand over to Kyla to close our proceedings.
Thank you so much, Jo, and Grishma and Pete and Cass as well, for all your contributions, and to our audience for the fascinating questions that you've been asking and your lively contributions to the discussion and debate. There should be a slide being displayed now that tells you a bit more about some other events that we've got taking place as part of One Planet Week. Please do look out for future events taking place as part of the alumni programme as well, which you can find on the alumni web pages. Just search alumni at University of York and you'll find everything there. As I say, we have a great discussion coming up soon on slavery and Black Lives Matters, and also on retail is our next one, which will definitely have a sustainability slant you would expect in our agenda. So again, just remains to thank everybody for having attended. Please do look out for the recording of this, and do let your family and friends know that it's available to them as well, and to other alumni too. Thank you very much again for taking part, everybody, and stay well.